Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Learning Lab. We're really pleased to have you here and have such a good turnout. So my name is Professor Nicholas Nisbet. I'm a research fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, and I'm here today on behalf of the Institute of Development Studies and the Colombo Urban Lab and the FRESH program. So today our Learning Lab is about food environments, which we've been learning about a lot over the last couple of days. It's a fast-growing area of research in food systems. It's really at the center of a lot of food systems research. We've had a lot of presentations with focusing on a lot of different methods in the last couple of days. Food environments are the part of the food system where people's real lives meet the food system, their desires, their food choices, but also the constraints around those food choices. And that's why it's important to have such a broad range of methods, but particularly to think about people's lived experience and to bring in participatory and very visual methods to really bring people's food lives, food environments alive. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. We're going to get you really interacting, really working quite hard, and hopefully enjoying and learning a lot from our experience of having studied food environments here in Sri Lanka as part of the FRESH program. So I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Leah Sam, who's going to be talking you through what we're going to be doing in the Learning Lab this afternoon. So over to you, Leah.
Thank you very much, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see such a great turnout for this Learning Lab. So just to say that this is based off of the FRESH work that we've been doing as part of the FRESH project. And this is the whole team that's been involved, many of which are here today and will be helping us through the interactive part of the session. So a little bit of a roadmap of where we're going today. I will start by talking us through the integrated approach that we've taken as part of the FRESH project. My colleague Anisha has spoken briefly about this yesterday in the opening panel, so it'll be a little bit familiar. So this will be the importance of taking lived experience approaches within food environments research, and then digging in a little bit deeper into photo voice as one particular methodology that we can use. From there, we'll hand over to Namaya to talk us through really the nuts and bolts of how this has been applied in Sri Lanka, so trying to demystify the process a little bit in case you're thinking of or planning on doing something similar in your own context. And from there, we'll dive straight into a practical activity. So really putting yourselves into the shoes of a participant of photo voice and having the opportunity to both narrate a photograph and then also be an interviewer drawing out more information. So more instructions on that when we get to it. And from there, we'll convene around our tables in small group discussions about how you found the process and what some of the strengths and limitations of this methodology might be. So this is really a time for you to ask the questions, anything that's been bugging you about an approach, anything that you'd like some advice on. Our facilitators will be roaming around to help unpack this a little bit more. So really this is an opportunity to dive in and get a sense of what it is to introduce lived experience methodologies and to try it out yourself. So it's supposed to be quite fun in the process, so not too serious. Just to say that the tables at the front, they have photographs and materials to help with the interactive activity. If your table doesn't have these images and you would like to take part in the more interactive side, please feel free to come forward and fill up these tables at the front. So we've heard a lot about food environments over the past couple of days, so hopefully this won't be brand new territory for you. But just to give a quick recap about where food environments sit within food systems research. So we often think about food environments as really being this important nexus where we as the consumers of food come into contact with the wider food systems processes that ultimately shape the food that is available. So this is one of the most used frameworks within food environments research. This is the Turner framework, and this has really helped us to understand kind of what are the physical features of food environments. So this is the external domain of what's available, the prices they're set at, the vendor properties, etc. And then also the personal attributes that we bring as consumers. And that is, what is affordable to us, what is desirable, what is convenient, etc. And it's funny, when I teach on this topic, I often give the example of Kerrygold butter. I don't know if any of you know this brand of butter. Show of hands, yeah, a couple, yeah. And really, my love for this butter goes beyond any rational food choice. So I've lived in a few different countries and I've paid up to $10 for this. So it goes beyond what is my physical accessibility to a food product. It goes to my cultural feelings of nostalgia as an Irish person, maybe a bit of brand loyalty, and a whole other set of memories that come with the food that we eat. So we know that food is so much more than just the calories that we're consuming. It's wrapped up in all sorts of social and cultural and economic dimensions. So originally, food environments research really took hold in high-income countries and was really focused around the retailing food environment. From here, the evolution of food environments research into low and middle income countries has really opened up and diversified our knowledge about the diversity of food environments and how we might go about understanding them. So this is an example that has come from Bogard et al., and this was a really important piece of research that really expanded beyond the retailing food environment to show the importance of different types of food environments. So whether that is growing food for own consumption in cultivated food environments, wild food environments where food is foraged or hunted from wild spaces, also food aid and food services. So thinking about social protection and the food that's provided that way. So really, there's a huge diversity, and therefore we need methodologies that can lean into that diversity and capture the nuances of how people experience and ultimately acquire their food. So this is where we enter this world of lived experience methodologies within food environments. And there has been a fantastic brand new piece of research that's come out just a couple of weeks ago, headed up by Karina Hawkes and colleagues at City University. And the title of this paper is that the full picture of people's realities must be considered to deliver better diets for all. And so if we think about the previous framework of the external and personal domains of a food environment, really what taking a lived experience approach is suggesting that we need much more nuance within that. So this research here by Hawkes et al. Has identified 12 realities that we need to consider in order for policy to really respond to people's lived experiences and therefore have a more impactful result. Because ultimately, if we're not understanding these contexts in a full and considered and nuanced way, it's very likely that the interventions and policies that we deliver might miss the mark in terms of actually being able to respond or fit into people's daily lives. So we can see here things that might be beyond what we would consider usual considerations within food environments research. So things like trust, time and labor, household materials and resources, emotional and mental and physical health. So we're getting this much broader sense of the factors that ultimately might affect people's food acquisition and therefore diet and nutrition outcomes. So this is the approach that we've taken within the FRESH project, and it's really tried to integrate these lived experience methodologies alongside more traditional food environment methodologies in order to really understand food environments in an in-depth way. So the key part of this approach is really that we're trying to get to a place of shared understanding of the needs and priorities within food environments. And to do this, we've identified 3 key stakeholders whose perceptions and ideas that we really wanted to consider in order to get to that point. So the first is that of community members, the people who acquire, prepare, and consume the food. The second then is vendors, those who ultimately are the ones responsible for the food that's available at a market level. And then also the policy stakeholders, so people who have the decision-making power to affect those food environments, some of which might be in the room today through the influence that we have also as researchers. So the methods that we've taken within this are threefold. So the first, taking a more traditional food environments approach, and that is geospatial mapping of food vendors, in our case, in 2 locations within Sri Lanka. So that's mapping the vendors, trying to develop a typology of the different types of vendors depending on the infrastructure that they have available, from vendors selling produce from the ground, mobile vendors, more permanently fixed vendors. And then layering that with nuanced, in-depth information coming both from in-depth interviews with vendors and community members, as well as our participatory photography, photo voice, specifically with community members. So within this approach, the vendor is also a central person who we wanted to really harness deep information from. So usually within food environments research, we might include vendors in something like a census or a mapping exercise, but we also wanted to know how they make decisions around what they stock, their interactions with the customers, their relationships with people further up the supply chain, etc. So we are now at the point in this process of we've developed these story maps which have layered these different types of information, and we've used this, this method, this tool of building a story map, which I'll touch on in just a moment, as a way to create a really engaging type of output or means of communication with a broader policy audience that goes beyond maybe a traditional policy brief or research paper. The idea being that integrating these multi-methods in a very engaging way ultimately has potential for more impact and more uptake. So just to say that this approach is something that we piloted here in Colombo. We've since expanded it into a second site, a low-lying tea estate sector here in Sri Lanka, but it's also being applied in Tanzania and the Philippines. And the idea of this approach is that it's not static and it's able to respond to the complexity and the difference between food environments. So within Tanzania, the focus is very much on focusing around the vendor and actually including them in the photo voice process. Also a much more rural location. And in the Philippines, it's really being applied to the school food environment as the target setting. So yeah, I guess the main point to make here is that these methods need to be able to adapt to the context. That's really important. So just to dig in a little bit more about photo voice, so this is one of the methods that we've used and something that we'll be experimenting with this afternoon. This is a method that was developed by Wang and Burris in the 1990s to really understand health inequalities within a very rural population in China. And they identified 3 main goals of photo voice, and they are enabling people to record and reflect on their community's strengths and weaknesses, promoting a critical dialogue and knowledge about important community issues, and then also reaching policymakers. And I think that's a really important point to make, is that this is a method that inherently has an action component at the end. So I know we've got a lot of researchers in the room, and we're very interested in what the findings are, but there really should be that extra step forward of where do we take these findings, and that being the jumping off point rather than at the point at which the findings make their way into a paper and then the process finishes. So ultimately, photo voice is the process of transferring the power within the research dynamic and putting the storytelling power into the hands of the participants. So Namaya will talk us through exactly how this was done in Sri Lanka, but ultimately it is the combination of participants taking images themselves and also captioning those images. So we have both the image and the caption, small narration, which sit beside each other and tell quite a full story of a given context. So in this context, we're really interested in food environments. So I've just got a few examples to really illustrate the nuance and the types of in-depth information that can come from photo voice. So this is from a training that we delivered with those country teams who've been implementing this within the FRESH project. So the first is coming from a colleague in Tanzania. And just in case it's difficult to read at the back, this says, "My midweek fresh produce purchases are often made during my commute in the late afternoon, walking from the bus stop to my home, influenced by the stalls I pass, the freshness of the produce, the amount of space in my backpack, and my cooking motivation." So we can see here, we get an idea of what the physical landscape is like. We can have an idea of the decision-making that is happening in that moment. And there's some really interesting theory about these methodologies that it's similar to like walk-along interviews or shop-alongs, where different things come to mind when you're in the moment and, in this case, taking an image, rather than what might come to mind in an interview setting where you're removed from the context in which you're studying. So another example here coming from Sri Lanka. So this caption is, "I like supporting small businesses, especially if they are sourcing from local gardens. Produce is cheaper in price, and I don't have to walk around a lot." So we can see this touching on those key food environment dimensions of convenience. We get some of the values that are coming up for this participant, that desire to support local gardens. We also, through the visual interpretation of the image, get a sense of the freshness and the quality of the produce too. Last example then coming from the UK. So this participant in the training has said that these apples look super fresh, but for some reason the plastic packaging puts me off. It affects my perception of the freshness of the fruit. So hopefully you can see the importance of having the image alongside the caption. So these could all be interpreted in very different ways. For example, a different person might look at that image of the plastic wrapped apples and they might find that it's really convenient to be able to buy 6 apples in one and the price is a little bit cheaper, for example. So we really need the description along with the image to get the full sense of what that participant's lived reality is. Because ultimately, many people can go into the same environment and have a very different experience and ultimately come away with a different food basket. So that's the point behind all of this. So unfortunately today, I don't have a huge amount of time to go into the nuts and bolts of how to build a story map. But the good news is that it is really easy to use. On each of your tables, there's a little brochure about the project, and there's a couple of QR codes. So if you scan one of those codes, you can see what the story map looks like. I personally think it looks like there might have been a professional designer involved, but the good thing is none of us on our team have professional design experience. That's how user-friendly it is. So there are 2 options for making a story map. The one on the bottom here, this website is completely free, and it has almost all of the same features as the paid-for option. So if you want to just have a play of what it's like to use this, it's great for communicating research, it's great for blog writing, it integrates multimedia options. So you can have audio, you can have video, you can make maps, integrate pictures, etc., etc. So it's just a really nice tool, one that we're really happy to share with you. There is also the paid-for version, which is the top web address. So this is more, if you were thinking at an organizational level, it would be useful for you to have. It does have some slightly more advanced features, especially around map making. So that's the tool that we've built them on. I'll just talk through a couple of examples of what you might use story maps for. So the first is actually making maps. So within the story map, we were able to map the vendors And you can see here we color-coded, and you can get a real sense of the diversity of vendors from those who sell vegetables, fruits, leafy greens, etc. We also made an alternative type of map where we mapped the route of one mobile vendor throughout the city. So you can see here that this vendor covers a lot of ground on his bicycle. And then that combined with the interview that we completed with this vendor, we also were able to draw out some further information around the loyalty of his customers, how they really wait for him because they value his fresh produce, and how he's created a USP or extra value to what he offers by also selling salflowers to his customers. They're also powerful for telling both collective and individual stories. So we've integrated the results from our photo voice study, a part of the study, into the story map. So here is an example from one of the images and captions. So this is Kamala, who's saying that eggs are expensive now, so when we can, we buy one egg and cut it in half for the two boys. So we can see her food plate down at the bottom and then her two sons. So we really get this very visual representation of what dinner looks like and how this has probably changed in the period of protracted crisis, which was covering our study period. As well as being able to tell collective stories, so we've included some infographics about how the food plate has changed over time, how the care burden has changed over time. So hopefully you've got a good sense that I'm really selling story maps, and I think everyone should be using them because they're really useful. So just to wrap up this part, so just to say that this approach that we've been taking, this integrated approach, we've been trying our hardest to create these very visual and engaging outputs, such as story maps, which has been really bolstered by this lived experience work, but not stopping there, really feeding this into the policy level audience through a series of workshops and following up with them individually to see how this research can be integrated into future actions, both within the FRESH project and more broadly. If you're interested in more of the findings about the project, we do have images and the research process on display outside. And with that, I will hand it over to Namaya to talk us through the nuts and bolts in Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. Hi, everyone. So my name is Nimaya, and I am a junior researcher with Colombo Urban Lab. I was part of the research team for Fresh Sri Lanka, and we primarily conducted our research in two areas in Sri Lanka, in Colombo and Deniaya. And so I will take you through how we conducted Photo Voice, which is a very interesting participatory research methodology. And if you have any questions, do save them for later, and we'll get back to you on those. So to start things off, I think one of the things that we identified through conducting Photo Voice is that it is heavily context dependent and also resource dependent. So firstly, can I see a show of hands of how many of you have, prior to this session, heard of Photo Voice or used it? Okay, so there's quite a few here who have heard of the process and used it. And something that I think you will resonate with as well is that the process is very highly context dependent and resource dependent. What we're essentially doing is we're asking respondents, in this case, in the case of Fresh, we asked the households that we engaged with for our research. We spoke to them, and we tried to get them to take pictures of their food environments, essentially. So that is what the Photo Voice process through Fresh was like. And when we implemented it in Colombo, in two sites in Colombo and then in Deniaya, the way it was conducted was completely different, because based on the community, based on the way they interact with each other, based on the way they interact with their food environments, the way the Photo Voice process played out was very different. So that's something you need to keep in mind. You need to really understand the community in order to make Photo Voice really a powerful tool in your research process. And something that we also realized was that no two Photo Voice processes or workshops are the same. So the way we conducted Photo Voice in Colombo was very different to the way we conducted it in DNIA. So that's something you need to keep in mind. All right, so this is a brief kind of timeline of how we did photo voice in Colombo, in one of the sites in Colombo. And by no means is this like a must-do process. Like I said, the photo voice process is very kind of adaptable to your own, the communities that you work with. So when we conducted photo voice in one of our sites in Colombo, this is the timeline that we had set out. So we started off with an introductory workshop. Actually, the photo voice process starts even before that. We had trainings and also spoke to local partners who had implemented photo voice previously, prior to this introductory workshop. And then we had this entire process where we took about 3 weeks to a month, depending on the site, to complete the entire photo voice process. And I will go through each of the elements just to show you how we implemented it in Sri Lanka. Right, so at the introductory workshop, actually before the introductory workshop, how did we select the participants for photo voice? That's something that we need to talk about. We had engaged with a few households for our research for FRESH. We had engaged with a few households, and the respondents that we engaged with, the pool of respondents that we engaged with were who the photo voice respondents comprised of, basically. The households that we engaged with were ultimately the participants of the photo voice process. So once we had selected the participants for photo voice based on whether they had a smartphone and also whether they were willing to take part in the photo voice process, we were able to select the participants for photo voice. And then after that, we had an introductory workshop. So at the introductory workshop, which took place at a community center close to the community, we introduced the participants to photo voice, because for many of them, they have never heard of photo voice, and so we needed to tell them what this process was about and what we wanted them to do. So participants were given an introduction to photo voice, and they were taught how important it is to caption the photos that they take. If I show you a blank picture without any words assigned to it, for instance, if you just take a picture on your table, those are just pictures without any kind of meaning, right? But when you add a caption to it, when you add something along with those pictures, if there was a caption along with the pictures on your table, then that would really make the pictures have more meaning. So we explained to the households why it was, the participants, why it was important to caption the pictures. We also taught them how to frame their pictures, how to consider things like lighting when they were taking these pictures. And then we also, at the introductory workshop, there were certain ethical considerations. So for instance, the pictures, once the participants take these pictures, it's the pictures that they have taken. So we needed to get permission from them on how these pictures were to be used. So even the pictures that you see outside of the exhibition is based on whether they have given consent to kind of display it out here for you. And also, the way the pictures were to be used were actually explained to them, and they were also given consent forms in all 3 languages. So they were able to really understand what the pictures were going to be used for. And then finally, because the first introductory workshop was conducted at a community center, a lot of them had to travel to the community center, so we also considered things like transport charges and also mobile data, because ultimately the pictures that they took were to be sent to us on WhatsApp, and so any mobile data charges that they would have to bear were also covered at this point. All right, so when we were deciding on the themes for photo voice, for the photo voice process, we decided on 3 broad themes prior to the introductory workshop. So these themes that you see on the screen: my favorite vegetables to cook, places I procure fruits and vegetables from, fresh fruits seen in the neighborhood during the week. These 3 themes are quite broad, they're quite general, and we left it that way because we really wanted to allow the participants to interpret these themes in the way that they want through the pictures that they take. So these 3 themes were given to the participants at the introductory workshop, and they were asked to send us pictures based on these 3 themes. So a total of 10 pictures per participant was required, and they were asked to send this to us via WhatsApp, And these are the 3 main themes that we selected. So the 3 themes, we selected them based on our intention of wanting to understand how households made consumption choices, as well as what their access to food environments was like. So once we conducted the introductory workshop, we gave participants a week to take these pictures and then send them across to us via WhatsApp. And the participants were asked to send, like I said, 10 pictures. Once the 10 pictures were received by us, we then followed it up with a one-on-one session with the participants. So we went and met them and we spoke to them about the pictures that they had taken. And the one-on-ones were scheduled in a way that allowed participants sufficient time to send in their photos. Of course, we have to be flexible in this case. So if some participants are unable to send pictures in by a week, then we had to adjust timelines accordingly. So that's something that you might have to take into consideration when you're implementing photo voice in your own communities. And then out of the 10 pictures that they sent us, according to those main 3 themes, we chose, collectively, we chose 3 pictures, and we finalized the captions for those pictures. So that was the intention of the one-on-ones that we conducted with the participants. Once the pictures and the captions had been finalized, the pictures were then grouped thematically by the Colombo Urban Lab team, and we printed it out along with the accompanying captions. And the objective of the final group discussion, which we were going to have later at the final discussion, was to create a conversation that went beyond one's own photos. So as you will see in the next slide, the pictures that we had finalized were ultimately displayed at a final exhibition and workshop. So instead of grouping, so initially we had those 3 main themes that I showed you. So the grouping in this case was not based on those 3 main themes, but rather based on what came up from the pictures once the pictures and captions were all taken together. We looked at the pictures and then we grouped them based on what was emerging from those pictures and captions. Right. So once all that had been done, we had a final workshop and exhibition. And at the final workshop, the participants, as you can see, they are all very busy looking at some of the pictures that they and the community members had taken. So we displayed them around the room, and they were given first an opportunity to go around the room and look at the pictures that they and their community members had taken. And then the participants were divided into 3 main groups. So the 3 main groups were based on the themes that we had identified that emerged from the pictures and captions. And then for 15 to 20 minutes, each group was facilitated by one of our team members. We had discussions about the pictures that people had taken and the captions, and we went beyond, basically went beyond looking at your own pictures. So after this round, everyone came together, and then the moderators, the facilitators summarized the key points that emerged from the discussions, and then also the participants were also given an opportunity to voice their own opinions about the challenges they face when accessing fresh produce. Because this is something I really like. So at the final workshop, one of the participants saw this picture of some plain tea and crackers, and she said that she felt like her own experiences was reflected in someone else's picture. So I'll just read out this caption here. I don't know who took this picture of the cups of plain tea when there was no milk powder in the house, but I'm thankful it was captured. This is my situation in my house too, and for the first time, we can't afford to give milk to the children. It's plain tea and some cream cracker biscuits every morning and evening. The grown-ups sometimes only have tea in the morning and skip breakfast, but it never occurred to me to show it in a picture. So this is something that came out in our final workshop. So she saw this picture, and then she felt like her own reality was reflected in this picture. So that was really great to see. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the practicalities of implementing photo voice. something that you need to keep in mind is when you're implementing this process in your own countries, in your own communities, you have to allow different ways of photo taking. So if they don't have a camera or a smartphone, you have to also allow for options for them to borrow phones maybe and take pictures so that they can be a part of the process and they are not excluded. Also, I would really recommend having one-on-ones with the participants, because having these one-on-ones really gave us a deeper understanding of the challenges that they face when accessing their food environments. Also, when we were receiving the photos, so we had a dedicated WhatsApp number for these photos, because of course the information on the photos that they send was sent to this specific number. And I would recommend having something like this as well if you're implementing it in your own country. Yes, and also, like I mentioned earlier, I showed you a broad timeline of how we did photo voice in one of the sites, but of course we adapted it to suit the communities and their needs. So you need to have a level of flexibility, and you need to be able to extend deadlines based on what the community needs are. Okay, so just some key reflections that we have identified through implementing photo voice in Sri Lanka is that photo voice can be a very powerful tool, but only if implemented correctly. So something that we identified also was that the process takes a lot longer sometimes than you think to get off the ground. Like I mentioned earlier, make sure you have some flexibility and you're able to accommodate the needs of the participants. It's very important for them to be heard, and this process is also for them to be heard because they are sharing their own perspectives. And also the process is highly context-driven, so don't be afraid to experiment and adapt the process to the needs of your own community. So that I'll leave you with that, and then I'm going to hand over to Leah, who will take you through the activity for this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Namaya. Hope you've got a great sense of the kind of nuts and bolts of what it is to apply a photo voice method. And now you will have the opportunity to give it a little go. So there's lots of materials on your tables. And the first part of the activity is really putting yourself into the shoes of someone experiencing their food environment. So this can be your own personal experience, or you can put yourselves into the shoes of someone completely different. There are images on your table, so you can select one of these images that resonates for you. Or maybe, like me, you have a camera roll absolutely full of food pictures that you might want to use instead. Or you might take an image from the internet, so that's completely up to you. The nice thing about selecting one of the images from the table is that these are a selection from our participants, from our training sessions, from Tanzania, the UK, and Sri Lanka. So it might be the opportunity to step into the shoes of someone completely different, if that sounds fun for you. And we're going to work through the captioning of one of these photos. So feel free to select one, and then we will caption it. There's also you can either decide to free write, so just the first things that come to your mind around how you're experiencing the food environment. That can be anything from your motivations for why you found yourself in this specific spot, what's going to motivate or influence the decisions that you make. And that could be your own personal experiences around convenience, the foods that your kids like to eat, packaging, loving Kerrygold butter, whatever it is. Or you could decide that you are, someone who is in this urban population in Colombo, and you might try to get into the mindset of someone else. So that is completely up to you. Then we'll get into partners, and you will present your picture to the person beside you, read out your caption, and then your partner will be then in the role of the qualitative researcher and ask some questions to try draw out some further information. We've got some guiding questions there to help along the way, and then you're going to swap. So then you will listen, deep listen to the person sharing their caption, and then you will draw out more information. And then we'll have a discussion on how it was to share your experience and then how it was to draw out further information. So that's the direction that we're going in. These are the captioning prompts, so you have them also on your table. We're going to hold any broader photo voice questions until the end of the session, because it might be that actually this exercise helps to draw some out. But any questions on this specific activity and what we're about to do? We will be popping around as facilitators to help as you go. Brilliant. If not, then please go ahead, grab a picture, and use maybe one of these to help with the captioning, and then we'll start to share them with each other. Great. hopefully you've got some captions written down. Yes? Maybe that's better. How have we done with the captioning? Have these been helpful to help sort of spur some ideas about how you might draw out some rich detail? So if you haven't already, maybe chatting with the person next to you, just display your picture and read out the caption that you've written. And then your partner can be then in the role of the qualitative researcher. And you can either ask the questions that come to your mind, or if you're feeling a little bit stuck, within Photo Voice we have the showed method, which are these questions here, which basically draw down in levels of detail. So going beyond just the description of what's happening in an image and really trying to expand it out to why is this important? How does it relate to the rest of our lives? And if there's an issue in there, what is it that we could potentially do about it? So for the next 5 minutes or so, we'll do this, then we'll swap over, and then we'll have a group discussion. So back over to you guys to swap around and share your photos and ask the questions. Great, okay. Fantastic. So we've got about 15 minutes left. For the next 5 or so minutes, I'm going to ask that on your tables, you collectively discuss how you found this process. So as researchers, how did you find stepping into the shoes and sharing your experiences? And how did you find asking those questions to draw out some further details? So ultimately, is this a tool that you might find useful in your own research? What are the benefits, and also what are some of the limitations that you might experience? So we'll have that discussion for the next 5 or so minutes, and then we'll come back to the wider group, and we can get a little bit of feedback. So that's where we're heading next. Thank you.
Hi everyone. thank you so much for actively participating in this exercise. It was really nice for the team to go around and hear you guys and like listen to what you were saying. And we hope that this was a really useful exercise for you and that you're taking something away from it for your own research. So we thought we will do a quick sort of reflection and a feedback from you guys. I'm not going to like go table by table. So basically, if anyone has anything they would like to share, what do you think about the photo voice exercise? As researchers, how did it make you feel to be on the other end of information, of having to share something about how these different photos made you feel? Is this something you feel you will use in your work? Do you have any ideas about adaptation? So we would love to hear any thoughts. So maybe if you just put your hand up, we can call on you and I think get a mic to you. There'll be some folks going around. And so we are hoping to make this a bit of an interactive feedback and discussion.
So I have a question which could become a discussion. I already discussed it with my partner, but how do you avoid social desirability bias? I feel like if I was asked to take a picture of my breakfast, I might add some vegetables and fruits which I don't actually consume. My partner said Sri Lankan, she has some experience in rural Sri Lanka, and she said they are very honest, but I'm still not convinced if that's true. So that's my question.
I think that's a really valid question and a really important one. And I would be happy for anyone on my team also to pitch in. But I think in research, particularly qualitative research, or actually even quantitative, I think social desirability is not something you can always control. I think it's something that we have to, it's inevitable. I think it's something that we have to be open to. But our experience is that when you use different types of methods, there are easier ways in which you can get more information and have a better nuanced understanding of what this response really means. And to be really honest, with photo voice, the advantage we had was that by the time we went into the photo voice workshop, we had already engaged with the households for over 2-3 months. They were very familiar with us, they knew our team, they knew the kind of questions that we had asked during the household surveys. So our team engaged with them for a couple of months. So we were quite familiar with them already when they went to the workshop. And I think that's one way that maybe you could avoid social desirability, because by then we were already familiar with what they were eating, what their economic conditions were like, what other issues they were facing, and we had a good rapport with them. So I think for us that helped. But I do also understand that this is not always something we have time for. It is sometimes a luxury to be in the field for a long time, get to know people, and then do this. There may be times where the only activity you're doing may be photo voice. And I definitely think, like what Nimaya was saying, the one-on-one session definitely helps establish a rapport and a relationship, which might help. But I think as researchers, we have to be open to the fact that social desirability is inevitable, and just think about how we frame the questions, how we frame the prompts, how we engage with the communities, and I think that's the best we can do. Yeah. Anyone else?
Thanks. This was a really fun exercise. I'm usually doing quantitative research, so doing this, and kind of the idea of me being the survey instrument is like something that's supremely uncomfortable to me. It's something I hope I'll have the chance to improve. So maybe I will, someday use these methods in my research. I guess I worried, just in the short exchange that we had, that maybe I was just going too far in one direction, with my questions about this, particular photo that Whiston had written his caption about. And so, I guess finding that balance of, kind of wanting to keep the conversation fluid, but also knowing that there are certain concepts that you want to touch on. I think it would require a lot of planning. So maybe you could share kind of what the approach was for that. Like, I think it was kind of a semi-structured process that you used. And, you know, would you just talk about one photo or have like several photos that you kind of went through with the participants?
Sure. To go to your first comment, I think we found it really helpful when Leah ran the photo voice workshop for us, because it put us in the shoes of the participants. So I remember how I felt when I was picking pictures, because I was like, oh, what will these guys think about my picture? So I was very careful to share what I thought was a nice picture, because I knew that other people would see it. And then that made me think, all right, like that's exactly how the community is going to feel. They're going to think, oh, the rest of my community, the research team that's engaging with me is also going to see these pictures. So I think we highly recommend that anyone who's implementing photo voice also do it themselves with others, so that you know what it feels like to take a picture. And food is also very personal. And it helps also to keep the prompts quite broad, and it allows different ways to interpret that also. To your second point, I think we shortlisted 3 from 6, 10. Okay, so they took 10 pictures, and then during the one-on-one sessions, our team worked with them to pick 3 pictures. So it's not that they necessarily picked what was sort of aesthetically pleasing or what we thought we would want to feature in an exhibition. It was led by the community, but the conversation really helped to pick 3 from the 10. And again, Quinn, to your point, yes, thank you, is that you can go in lots of different directions, because each prompt, each photo can tell so many different stories. One way that we were able to kind of narrow it down was that because we were coming from our household interviews, some of the prompts that we selected and some of the discussions we had with the community was around what were we missing from our household interviews, what did we want to know more about, because that really helps you think, like, what do you want as a researcher out of this photo voice exhibition? So that helped us kind of not go down every single rabbit hole that seemed very interesting. We were very careful about what more nuance do we need, what more understanding do we need, and that helped us think about what conversations or what questions to ask the community. But it is really hard. It is really hard. So I think having a very clear purpose and that clarity helps. I think we have time for one more question because we have 5 minutes left. Would anyone from the team like to share anything that would help any of the questions that have come up? Nima? Okay. Yes.
Anymore, can you tell me how it went with the exhibition? Was that something that people got really excited about? And would you ever think about doing anything like giving awards for, like, since you were also kind of showing them how to make photos that were like aesthetically pleasing? I guess some of them might have gotten kind of creative. I see the examples of the captions you had were also talking about making it like a poem.
Okay, just a quick clarification. Do you spell out the names of the people who took the photos? So isn't that a conflict that everyone knows what each other picture took?
Yeah, so we did the smaller workshops. So we did it with the same community, so they were already quite familiar with each other. But because we had their consent forms, we knew who said, yes, it's okay to use my name. And there were some said, no, anonymize it. So we go into the process knowing who wants to share what. I think mostly everyone who participated were fine because they were already, they knew the rest of the people in their community. But I think it's also that the topic it's quite broad, like the themes were broad, it wasn't extremely sensitive. So I think people were able to openly share as well. The other thing was that the captions, we also asked them, we said if it's hard to like type or write, you can also send us voice notes. So that was also one way that we were able to kind of match the photos and the caption. But I think overall, what you have to see in this process, and Quinn, to your question around the prize, is that because we say there is no right answer, there is no wrong answer, we are not trying to pick the best thing. This is around engaging with the community, but also being so that they themselves can kind of talk about the same issues, because I think we've also, these are, I mean, at the time that we did it, this is quite a sensitive subject. I think it was a nice way for like a smaller group and a smaller community to realize that there were shared issues, that there were shared frustrations, that there were shared experiences. But I think my personal opinion is that it would be better not to pick or rank. The idea is the photos are just a tool. To be really honest, if once you do it, you'll realize it is essentially a focus group discussion. It is a lot richer, and people are a lot more open to giving you those answers because they're responding to a photograph. It is a far more interactive focus group discussion with what essentially is a visual aid. And it just helps, open more conversation. So it's really not about the best picture or getting a perfect picture with an exhibition in mind. It's just a pathway to a really rich, wonderful discussion. And for us, it was something that, really complemented the household interviews and the vendor interviews that we did. So on that, I'll close the session because I think they need the room. Thank you so much. So on behalf of Colombo Urban Lab and the Institute for Development Studies, thank you very much. You've been a great audience engaging with this concept and with our learning lab. If you have any questions, we'll be around for a little bit longer. We are happy to answer any questions. And also, now that you have been a part of this learning lab, please take a look at the photo voice of our communities that's outside. They're going to dismantle it around 6. So I hope you have some time to take a look at it now that you've been on the other side of that experience. Thank you very much.